Just about a minute in, so I'm going to slowly start my introduction. Thank you to everybody who's joined us today. We're very excited to be having a town hall. My name is Karina Mills. I am the Vice President of the Academy for Emerging Professionals. I'm very pleased to have this joint program with AIA California and AIA Los Angeles to speak about the AREs and have a chance to talk with NCARB today. This session will be recorded. And AIA California AP will provide a recap following the town hall. We do want to encourage people to ask questions. This event is very much about having a conversation, getting us together, sharing questions and answers. Please use the Q&A function for asking questions. For any questions that we might not have time to get to today, AIA California and NCARB will provide a follow-up for any of those unanswered questions, just to make sure we can get to everybody. As a little bit of a preamble, I'd just like to say that AIA California did launch a survey to ask members and test candidates about their test taking experience, how things have gone before and after with ARE 5.0. Very quickly, just want to mention that we're pleased to get a good handful of responses. It was a modest survey group, and that AIA California and other AIA components are always looking to members to understand best like how these experiences are going. So we just want to encourage everybody, when you see these survey opportunities, please take them. Fill out the survey as quickly as you can. We try to make them fast and easy, but it really helps us to understand from AIA how our members are feeling. So I just want to emphasize that to everybody and say that in looking at the survey results, I'm pleased to say that it sounds like a lot of folks are getting the messaging from NCARB. They're getting the resources, they're able to see them. And in terms of, what's still troubling people, the whiteboard is still new. We're having some frustrations with it. We're hoping that the tool gets better. So just want to be honest about, what it is that we saw and recognize our candidates, and we really want to address these concerns. But again, I was very encouraged to see that the resources that NCARB are putting out are known about, and most people are able to access them and take the time to understand them. The goal of the town hall, again, we really want to open a line of communication and make sure that everybody knows that that line of communication is open and has been open. We've been talking with Jared for several months. The AIA California has a great relationship with NCARB, and as we started hearing about concerns with the changes, we did make sure that we were having a conversation with NCARB, but now we're wanting to move to making sure that members can also be part of that dialogue. So that's the big part of today, making sure that the conversation is open and visible. We also shared some of the nature of the messaging that was happening back in the fall through relevance. So just again, want to encourage everybody who's tuned in today to make sure that you are also looking at relevance, the newsletter, and chapter communications. These are the ways that we're trying to let you guys know what conversations we're having with our partners like NCARB. We also want to encourage our EPs to take an active role in the process, and that leads me to my introduction of our panel today. So we have Francisco Arias, who is an Associate Director with AIA Los Angeles. He's going to be leading our panel discussion today, along with David Garcia. He is our AIA California Licensing Advisor South. And then, of course, Jared Zurn, AIA, is with us from NCARB. So here's our three primary panelists. Elise Robles is also with AIA Los Angeles. She's an associate director there, ex officio. She works very closely with Francisco. And Liam Hanlon is also a licensing advisor. He is a licensing advisor for the North region. And so just really want to make sure that everybody knows about our resources from California. David and Liam are go-to people for folks who have questions about licensure and liaison with NCARB quite a bit. So they are good points of contact. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Francisco to get us into our panel discussion. Francisco?
Well, thank you very much, Karina. And I want to first of all thank everybody for tuning in this is a great opportunity for us to connect with NCARB. And also, and most importantly, I want to thank Jared for taking the time to meet with us and give us this personal connection to NCARB once again. And what I like to do is I like to start this discussion with a very important question, if you will, a question that I think mostly everybody on this phone call has asked themselves at least once. In my case, maybe more than once, but that's a different story. But what I ask myself, and I think most of you have asked yourselves, is what is the importance of licensure? Why do I even want to get licensed? I've asked myself, right? So for me, my personal answer is, and everybody in this calls will be slightly different, completely different. For me, it's about that finish line, right? We gone through this academic process, internship process with AXP, IDP when I started, the exam process, and eventually the inevitable stamp. My question, initial question for Jared is, give us NCARB's perspective on the importance of licensure and what value does that bring to our candidates?
Sure. Thank you, Francisco. It's great to be here. I'll start by saying that I'm always happy to connect and talk with people. So that's an interesting question. I think you almost answered it to some degree that it is unique for every individual, right? So I don't think there's a stock answer that says, well, you should become licensed because I will. And what's interesting about your question is from NCARB's perspective, the license is really about ensuring that each individual who holds it can protect the public. And you'll actually see that if you come to our website and you look at our mission statement, we work through the jurisdictional licensing boards because it's the jurisdictional licensing boards that actually grant you the license. NCARB doesn't. Like we don't give you a license. It's the state of California or the state of Nevada. And it's all about public protection. And so when we talk about the exam, you're probably going to hear me say this a lot, where the content is about you, the individual, being able to provide this practice of architecture to people who, let's be honest, clients don't get us as architects, right? They usually don't. And so it really is a trust factor about once you have a license, they inherently are going to trust you. And then you have to understand that from a professional perspective. So NCARB wants people to be licensed because then they're prepared to provide that service to a somewhat uninformed customer at times, but make sure they still get good quality service.
Oh, that's great. David, do you want to add anything to that from the AIA perspective?
Sorry, I was using my wrong mouse. Two mice, two mice on my desk. I actually want to add it from my personal perspective. I think there's different ways of going through the path of licensure. For certain firms, you can't become a PM or work with certain school districts, for example, until you are licensed. So even though you could be, getting the experience and starting to receive those tasks, I think a lot of times EPs want to move up to that PM level and want to reach into those levels. But sometimes it's a hindrance, right, because of legalities. And then somebody might say, well, I'm just going to be a house architect. I'm just going to be doing residential. So it really depends. But I agree that there is we have to protect the profession. And I think that's one of the ways that one achieves that status of, well, now you're an architect, but also what does that mean to the individual?
No, those are very good points. One of the reasons that I brought that up is, you're starting to see certain academic professions that are no longer focusing on architecture, but rather focusing on design and bypassing or curtailing the whole licensure process. Just wanted to get what you guys thought about that process, about how schools are now changing the curriculum to not even engage with architecture altogether. Jared?
Well, yeah, I will say, I mean, from an academic perspective, so you have to understand my background a little bit. Before I joined NCARB, I was back in the state of Minnesota. I was a licensed architect but I was teaching at a community college in an architectural technology program. So I completely understand from an academic perspective why I want academic freedom, right? I showed up into that classroom and I, knew what I was trying to convey to those students in every course that I was teaching. And it wasn't always a direct, like you probably cannot always draw a direct line to everything I was doing to licensure, right? That's the reality of it. And NCARB realizes that. So yes, there are definitely programs like you're saying, Francisco, that are sort of focusing more on just design thinking, as they're referring to it, than architecture. Obviously, I hope whatever student is in those programs understands, sort of the value they're getting from that program, because it's great to understand design thinking. You can do a lot with it in this world. But if you want to become a licensed architect, I'm very happy that the degree I earned, I went to North Dakota State University, and I'm very happy that it was a very applied architecture program. Like in third year, I still remember, like in third year, I was cranking out details in courses, and my instructors were tearing them apart because I wasn't properly controlling moisture, or so, they didn't have a thermal break because it's North Dakota, right? And so it's good to have that balance, I think, of design thinking, but the applied side of like what it takes to put a building together and what it means to manage flow of people around a space, and all of those things. That's what architecture is.
That's great. I think that's a great answer, and I think the value that you guys brought into it, both you and David, personal value and the value that we're providing safety to the public. That's one of the main goals for licensure. I like to think so, right? I'm speaking for myself. I can't imagine going to a doctor and figuring out that the person's not a licensed doctor, right? So there's that same equivalence. Now, changing gears ever so slightly, most of us here are going through the traditional path. We're talking about academia. We go through the academic process, AXP, the testing, and then the stamp. Talk to me about alternate licensure paths, because our basis or our members are a diverse group. Some of us got trained in a foreign country. Some of us did not attend an accredited university. What other paths does NCARB offer currently, or maybe in the future, for licensure?
Well, there are actually a bunch. And the fact that you're in California actually opens the door to a lot of opportunities. And I'm sure most of you know this, right? So there are 55 jurisdictional licensing boards across the country. 16 of them do not require the NAB accredited degree for initial licensure. So, and some of them, they're the big ones, like they're the big states. It's New York, California, Texas, some of the other ones. So, I mean, there's opportunities to earn your license without a NAB degree. But yes, a lot of people get it, right? You get a NAB degree, they go to work in an architecture firm or some engineering firms for a while, they earn their experience, and then they take their exams and they get their license. But if you don't have that background, it just changes your path. It's just a different path is the way to think about it. So sure, I got a NAB degree and I worked in, I think, 4 different architecture firms before I earned my license. If you don't have a NAB degree, what California is going to expect from you is more experience, right? And if you haven't looked into it, check out the California Architects Board website, because they lay out what the requirements are. And if you have a foreign degree, you have opportunities to have that foreign degree evaluated. I actually noticed in one of the survey responses, somebody mentioned AIA, which is an evaluation service for people who have a foreign degree. They look at your coursework, they compare it to the NAB requirements using the NCARB education standard, and that can then get counted towards that NAB degree. I will admittedly say, if you don't have the NAB degree, it likely is going to take you longer. It just does. The numbers bear that out. And you're going to have to understand your situation, because it can be very different if you have a 2-year, let's say, associate's degree, and you're on that path, compared to somebody who maybe has a 4-year architectural related degree, but it just doesn't happen to be NAB accredited, because those people are also going to have different paths to get to licensure. But the great news is California is open to all of those paths.
Now, one thing that can you expand a little bit? I don't think you mentioned it. IPAL. Talked a little bit about the IPAL program.
Sure. So the IPAL program isn't really a different path to licensure, because it's using the same NAB degree, it's using the same AXP, and it's using the same ARE. So it's not different, it's just structured. So there are some academic programs, some universities that have said, hey, we want to structure an IPAL program, which is the integrated path to architectural licensure. And what they're integrating is they're figuring out how students can get experience while in school that's managed in a way to make sure that it's the right experience at the right time in comparison to the coursework. So that way everything complements itself to get to the point where by the time they're in their last year of studies, they're actually sitting to take the ARE because they've basically completed their coursework and they've completed a lot, if not all, of their experience program. So again, IPAL is not a different path. It's the same path, just in a highly structured way is the way to think about it.
Now, you said only a few universities are doing this, or academic institutions are doing this. Is there a reason why all of them are not doing it?
I think it's a choice. The universities can do it or not. I think one of the factors from a university perspective is that balancing of gaining the experience while going to school. So depending on where the school is located, they may not have the luxury, honestly, of being able to place a lot of students into structured internships. Again, I went to North Dakota State University. I'm sure you've all been to Fargo, North Dakota. No. But I'll tell you, if you go to Fargo, North Dakota, right, there are more architecture students in the city of Fargo than there are architecture firms. And there's really no way there's not the pipeline there. I think in some of the larger urban environments where there are urban campuses, it's a different environment and it works for them. Again, so it's really an option or an opportunity for universities to pursue if they'd like to.
And Jared, how have you seen those students come out of school in terms of their education and in that path?
So we're actually sort of still digging into the data on this because we do find this fascinating. What we have found in the early data is that a lot of the students who are choosing to go into an IPAL program or IPAL path, they already have experience before they go to school. So these might be people who went and got a 4-year degree in architecture, maybe a Bachelor of Science in architecture. They're choosing a master's program that offers an IPAL option because after their 4-year degree, they went to work for a while. So they are bringing, I think it was like over 20% of the students that have gone into an IPAL program bring experience with them before they start the IPAL program. So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we're finding. It's, hey, let's open up this flexibility, and it's really worked well for some. We're not seeing a lot of people thought, 18-year-olds are going to come out of high school, they're going to go to a 5-year program that's an IPAL program, and then they're going to graduate as a licensed architect at the age of 23. Well, sure, that's theoretically possible, but it's actually highly, highly unlikely because, again, I went through a 5-year program. There's no possible way you could have crammed AXP on top of me being a full-time student, right? It just wouldn't have worked. And honestly, that's what we also see in a lot of the IPAL options that are being offered is the programs either embrace people that come in with experience, or students choose to just like go to work for a while and then maybe come back to the school and finish out the program that way.
Thank you, Jared. I'm going to change the conversation, or at least the focus of it ever so slightly, and talk a little bit about the pandemic or disruption that we've all been experiencing over the year plus. So immediately within California, within the US, within the world, everybody had to adapt to the new normal. Companies had to adjust, trying to figure out ways to keep their employees employed, and most importantly, still be able to provide the services to their customers, their members, and so on. I'm assuming that NCARB was no different. Can you talk to us about the immediate need or the changes and adaptations that you guys have to do as a result of the disruption?
Sure. So, well, first of all, welcome to my home. I am sitting in what used to be a bedroom, in all honesty. So NCARB, like a lot of other organizations, so when the pandemic hit back in March of 2020, obviously the first thing was like, what is this? We pivoted to remote work like many other places did. And then at the same time, I think the big thing that we all experienced was you could tell companies didn't exactly know how to handle it, right? There's a lot of unknowns. And that's when the test centers network decided that they were just going to close. And I mean, that was a big shock to NCARB, I think, as much as it was to every single candidate, where we literally got an email from Prometric saying, we're going to close our test centers, there's a pandemic, and then we're going to reopen. I think when they first closed, they said they were going to reopen. Remember the optimism of 14 days later? We're going to close for 14 days, and then we're going to reopen.
Right.
Everything's going to be great, right? And so NCARB, along with Prometric, and honestly, all test centers, PSI, Pearson VUE, all the major testers, they all did the same thing. We all sort of were figuring it out as we went. And so from that end of March and then into April, the test centers were still closed. What NCARB did quickly was we went, okay, obviously exams are disrupted. And the first thing we looked at was rolling clock, because we know the rolling clock can impact a lot of candidates. So we have implemented, and this was months and months ago, we did the automatic rolling clock extension totaling 15 months. We did like the first one for 3 months again, because I guess we were optimistic, like, oh, it'll be fine in 3 months. And then 2 months in, we're like, no, this is not good. And so then it was like, we did a 6-month extension on top of that. And then we came back and we did another 6 months extension on top of that. So it has totaled a 15-month extension all the way back to March of 2020. So that's one thing NCARB did. Obviously, then we worked with Prometric as far as when they reopened. And I definitely remember the reopening where we were at first not on the essential testers list. So candidates had appointments and they were getting canceled like crazy because we weren't essential, but other people were. So then we went back and worked with Prometric to get on the essential testers list. So that helped diminish the amount of exams being canceled. And it honestly, I would say, took probably about 6 months for Prometric even to figure out their rhythm. I'm like, and NCARB with them about how are they going to administer these exams still in test centers with social distancing and the masking requirements, which are still in place today. If you test today, you still have to wear a mask in a Prometric test center, and they do try to do social distancing in their lobbies and things like that. So yeah, like we really, I think, pivoted a lot. And of course, right in the middle of it, as things were shut down, the decision was made to say, let's take a serious jump into online proctored delivery, which NCARB had been investigating, but that was not on our 2020 roadmap. I will just tell you, online proctoring was on like our 2025 roadmap. Yeah, and so this became an urgent pivot for the organization to turn that on. And today, the reality is about 25% of area administrations are online.
Wow, 25%.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good number. Now, so you talked a little bit about the changes. You rolled them out. Then comes the feedback that you hear. What type of feedback did you get, and what have you learned from those changes?
So first piece of feedback, the change happened way too fast, right? That was the first thing. Some of you that will remember the 4.0 to 5.0 transition. You're shaking your head. You're like, oh yeah, you hate that, right? And I do too. I was at NCARB during the 4.0 to 5.0 transition. But one of the things that went really well about that transition was that we had a lot of time. There was 18 months of dual delivery. We had even announced 5.0 was coming like years in advance. And so it really allowed us that opportunity to communicate and build and structure and do all these different things. And that we didn't have that opportunity with the pandemic, or we didn't feel we had that opportunity. Like NCARB decided like, no, we need to move into online proctoring and not do it on our roadmap of 2025, right? Because if I was talking to you 3 years from now, go, yeah, we're turning on online proctoring because of the pandemic, you would all be looking at me like I was crazy. So one of the things we did is we did move quickly, and we fully acknowledge that fact, and that was an intent because we didn't know, right? Were test centers going to shut down again? Remember, this was when they were talking about the second wave and the third wave, and we didn't know what was going to happen. So we moved quick, understood that that was disruptive to candidates. We did our best to communicate, but we got a lot of feedback on how we need to communicate differently, different modes of communication, try to connect with everybody. So we did that. And some of the other changes that happen, and we can't not talk about it, it's the changes to the break policy and the way items lock, right? And the elimination of scratch paper in test centers and for all candidates, right? And those were changes that came into play because of the pivot to online proctoring. And so you're gonna hear me use the term psychometrics. Psychometrics is the study of testing. And NCARB works with psychometricians. So these are these PhD, candidates. They've gone through all their schooling about appropriate measurement and testing. And the advice is from them, because it's how do you manage security and access, and how do we do it quickly? And that's what led to all of these different decisions about online testing is great from a convenience factor if it works for you, but from a security perspective, it adds all kinds of complexity that we have to address. And so that's where the scratch paper went away, right? And then that's also what drove the locking of items after you take a break, because if you're testing online and you take a break, you can get up, you can go outside that, your door, and we don't know if you're looking up previous answers, right? So and obviously we couldn't allow you to do that. So that turned into, we have to start locking items when people go on break. And again, I would say, so feedback on that, Francisco, people hated it. Like, I'm gonna be blunt. They did, and I understand that, because I've been a candidate. I know what it's like. And from an NCARB perspective, it's the balance of maintaining exam validity, because if we can't maintain exam validity, the state of California is not going to accept exam results. Because I'll tell you, that's the number one thing that a member board cares about is exam validity. And that means when you show up in front of the California board saying, hey, I'm ready for my license, what you don't want is you don't want them questioning your exam results, right? You want them to go, great, happy to have you, here's your license.
I really appreciate that insight, especially on the whiteboard and online proctoring. It really brings a lot of the comments that I've read and some of the feedback that we've been getting into perspective. Now, if I could switch gears ever so slightly, jumping onto the topic of communication, right? So we're going through this exam, and let me step back. Communication to me is key, especially in a relationship, right? You have to be able to talk to your partner or be able to communicate, get points across in order to have a fruitful and meaningful relationship. I think the same applies to NCARB and its members. It has to be that trust, that communication, not one way, but both ways, the ability to communicate back and forth. Mm-hmm. So with that said, what are best practices with dealing with any issues that come up either before an exam, during an exam, or after an exam?
Sure. So let me take them in order. So before an exam. So let's say you have an exam scheduled, and so obviously you can reschedule it. I try to advise people not to reschedule if at all possible, right? You can get in a habit of constantly delaying your performance, which is not a good thing, but maybe you need to, right? Maybe, something happens in life and you just have to reschedule. But there is a policy that says you cannot reschedule your exam if it's less than like 4 business days away. But life happens. So let's say you're sitting here today, your exam is scheduled for Monday, right? And all of a sudden, you do not feel well, right? Like you're not in a good place. What you need to do is, in that situation, reach out to customer service, right? Because if you contact customer service before the exam day and say, hey, whatever happened, whether it's you're not feeling well, there's some family emergency, something like that, we work with candidates to then give you a C credit. Basically you become a no-show for the appointment. We give you a C credit, your eligibility resets, and then you can go in and retest without losing that exam fee. Now I will tell you, the reality is, yes, customer service is going to ask for some sort of documentation, right? That something's going on. And I think you understand why. We can't just say, oh, shoot us an email and let us know you're not feeling well, and we'll automatically give you a free retesting.
Right.
Right. There's going to be there's a little check and balance that happens there. So that's the beforehand. If you have questions about the exam beforehand, either use the online community, read the ARE guidelines and the handbook. I know nobody wants to read the ARE guidelines and the ARE handbook, but there is a lot of valuable information in there. So check that out, or again, contact customer service and they can help you understand the pieces and parts of it that you're interested in. That's the before. On test day, the reality is the connections between you and Prometric, because there are calling NCARB if you're having a technical issue on your exam in the moment, we really can't do anything about it because we're not that connected. Like our systems are not so interconnected that I'm able to look at what's going on with your exam when you're taking your exam. So if you're having a technical issue or you're whether at a test center or online, your connections with Prometric to work with them through that. When it's done, when that exam is done, that's when you can reach back out to NCARB and say, hey, I tested, maybe you tested yesterday, there were issues, then let us know. But we always tell you to tell the proctor first, because the proctor then documents what happens. Again, that gives us the evidence at NCARB, right, that something happened. That way, when you contact customer service, then they look into it, because they call it a candidate performance report. They look into the candidate performance report, and then they can work to a resolution. Resolution can take a few days, right? Because again, there's like research that may need to happen. So I get it as a candidate. If you went in and you had like a terrible experience and your exam crashed and it couldn't restart, I know you're looking for like immediate resolve this today.
Exactly. And that was, sorry, go on.
No, I completely understand that. The reality of the situation is, great, let us know. We are going to look to resolve it as soon as possible. But if we have to wait to get some information or we want to look into the exam results that come back. So again, technically, so you know what happens, if a candidate's testing right now, like they're down the street at the local Prometric test center, we don't even know that those results have posted until tomorrow, because it's just the way the technology works, that the candidates testing today, their exams get scored, the results get imported tomorrow morning. And so that's part of the reason if you call us immediately, we're actually kind of in the dark on stuff, like for this window of time. If you wait until the next day or the day after, we can actually go look at exam results in the system and then take some action on things like that.
Well, I think that sort of answers a little bit of my question. If anybody's like me, at the moment I send an inquiry, I hit send, 5 minutes later, I'm looking at my inbox expecting a response. It's all about instant gratification, right? So what would you say it's an average or an adequate NCARB response time? That way we know, okay, well, NCARB will respond within 2 days, a day, 5 days. Is that something that you can answer? And the reason I'm thinking is I think about our profession when we're responding to RFIs, there's a certain timeline that we have to respond to certain items. Is there some sort of metric or number that we can feel safe with saying, like, look, I'll get a response within 5 days, a week?
So the reality I will tell you is it does flex a little bit, because so NCARB from a customer service perspective, there are approximately 30 or so people who work in customer service on an ongoing basis. Now that's not just exam customer service. So that's AXP, that's record transmittals for the licensed architects that are certificate holders and the other services that NCARB does provide. So I know if you send an email, the goal is to try to get back to the candidates and have it resolved within like a 3-day time frame. Right now, I know that window is longer. If you send an email to NCARB today, you're going to get an automated response that's going to tell you, okay, NCARB's received your communication, and we're going to get back to you. I actually think right now it says like 7 days, which is a long window for us because there's a backlog happening right now in that side of the house. And so again, the other thing to know is if you do send an email or if you call, we use as you can imagine, a customer service tracking system. So a ticket gets created, the ticket gets tracked, and that way, if let's say it's a specific exam issue, If you contact the frontline customer service, they probably that next day are talking to somebody on the exam team who's like digging into your results, getting back to the customer service agent so that way they can get back to you. So it could even be when you talk to a customer service agent, it might take that 2-3 days to get back to you because it's we need to look at it, get them an answer, and then they follow up with you.
Okay, so now based on the feedback that you've received from candidates over the last year concerning some of the issues that they've experienced with either the testing, online proctoring, what is NCARB doing to provide clear communication about any future changes?
Sure. So if you have not, you should be receiving, if you're an AIA candidate right now, we are doing like every 2 weeks, we have been sending out an AIA update. So I don't know if you're sick of us yet or not, but we've sort of been in this cadence for a bit. Elisa's like shaking her head, yes. Okay, I understand. It's partly because we've been wanting to address the technical issues that have bubbled up in the testing channel, and we want to be transparent about what's going on. So we've been actively working with our test driver, right? So this is one company, it's called Zoomorphics. So we're working with Zoomorphics, we're working with Prometric, we're having them work together to get this worked out. And so we committed to, okay, every 2 weeks, we're going to give you an update. Like, here's what's going on online, here's what's going on site. And there's 2 different things playing out, right, between the modalities. So that's how we're communicating. Now, the reality is I think as this settles, we're probably going to go into like a monthly AIA update. That's kind of our normal cadence from a communications perspective. I will beg, please do not opt out of our emails, because you can, right? When you get our emails at the very bottom, there's like on all standard emails, it's like, would you like to opt out? Click here. And if you as a candidate opt out of any NCARB emails, what ends up happening is our email distribution company called Emma, you see the little logo on the bottom of the emails, Emma won't send you any more emails. It will automatically remove you from the mailing list. So we're going to want to be communicating with you, but you may not be receiving those messages. And so I always really, really caution on this one. I mean, I get it. You may not want to read every email we send you, but please don't unsubscribe, because then you are going to miss information.
So what's the process? Say I accidentally unsubscribe. How do you resubscribe?
Yeah, Francisco accidentally last week. If you reach out to customer service and let us know that you want to make sure you're subscribed, we work with our communications department to work with Emma to like put you back on the list. Now, the other thing we will do too is if you log into your NCARB record, anytime that there are critical updates that are happening, we always put banners up too. So you may have experienced this, where when you log into your NCARB record, this little banner comes up across the top. Again, please read the banner when it comes up across the top and just don't hit the X as quickly as possible, because what we're trying to do is make sure that when you log in, you're getting the information that's the most timely. And honestly, those are our main ways of communicating with candidates are through email. So please keep your email address up to date. Don't unsubscribe. And it's through messaging that can happen inside of the record when you log in.
Thanks, Jared. I do want to at least add to that, because early on, we were all sort of confused, right? We didn't know what was going on. And so those emails that we're receiving now have helped. The transparency, I think, for a lot of us can be even more helpful, right? Because a lot of times we know you guys are working on it. We just don't know what's happening behind closed curtains. And so when we see that you guys are either working or something is not working, I think that also helps us to know they throw this at us and then walked away from it, right? And so now that it's 2 weeks, I think we're constantly going back to it and seeing, okay, there is an update here. There is some change here. Because I think a lot of our members feel that if you have a change, then regardless of whether it's beneficial for us or not, it's going to move forward, right? And a lot of people don't know that. And actually, maybe this is a question that kind of goes back to online proctoring. Did you guys test some of these out with the user group before? How did you get to those decisions?
Absolutely. So, I mean, we certainly do test things. We have what they call user acceptance testing. We go through a user acceptance testing phase. That was actually one of the reasons why online proctoring was initially delayed. If you kind of think back when NCARB first started talking about pivoting to and offering an online proctoring option, we were talking about November. We were like, okay, we're gonna launch probably in the November timeframe. And again, that was quick, and we knew that. But as we were doing our user acceptance testing, we were like, nope, this is not ready. It was not ready for prime time. And so we didn't launch in November, and we delayed, and we launched in December. And again, I understand, because I read the comments on the survey. So everybody who completed the survey, as Corinna said, great. Because I read every single comment, I've looked at every one of those. And there were comments about the whiteboard and how can we make it better. And I will admit, right, is the whiteboard the best drawing tool ever? No, it is not. Is it going to get better? Yes, we're actually working on it right now. So David, kind of like you said, yeah, we're working on stuff. We're testing improvements to the whiteboard right now, where there'll be some updates to the tool set. One of the things we also do at NCARB, though, is we don't want to tell you hey, we're going to be rolling out new tools to the whiteboard, on let's say May 1st, because we don't know if they're actually going to be ready on May 1st. Because when we're testing, if we're finding bugs, if we're finding that does not function the way it's supposed to, right? So what I will tell you is we are actively working on system improvements with Prometric and Zoomorphics, and we're actively working on enhancements to the whiteboard and the calculator, because personally, I think that calculator needs some major updates. And as soon as we have those tested and functioning the right way, we're going to turn those on. We'll probably turn on another demonstration link so candidates can go start getting used to it. And then we'll say, okay, on this day, these are when the tools go live in the test centers. Because again, I don't want a candidate who's ready to test to not know which version of the tool set they're going to have in the test center. So that is our strategy on how we try to do this. Again, switching to online proctoring, things were expedited. It's not going to be that same way if we as we switch to PSI, and we haven't talked about that yet, but it's been in some of our communications that early next calendar year, so the early 2022 timeframe, candidates are going to stop going to Prometric and they're going to start going to PSI. And we have a major testing plan in place. And people ask me why is it not until 2022? And it's because systems are being built, testing is being done, and we're planning on doing a pretty large operational pilot where real candidates in real PSI test centers are going to be taking exams all across this country before all of the candidates are taking exams in PSI test centers across the country.
Thanks, Jared. Right before we're almost running out of time, and I want to make sure that we have ample time to answer some of the audience questions. But before we jump off, I wanted to ask just one quick question. Aside from the pandemic, there was this large cry for equality, diversity, and transparency that roared through all industries. And it's not something new. It's something that's been going on for some time, but it seems like everything just seemed to boil over last year. And my question to you is, what steps is NCARB taking to ensure that we are producing a more diverse and equitable profession?
Yeah. Francisco, I completely agree. And I think it's good, right, that it's finally boiled over. Let's be honest about this, right? It's good that we're finally having what can be hard conversations. NCARB has been doing a lot, and we were actually doing things before it boiled over, which is good that we were being proactive. But inside of NCARB, one of the things you've probably already seen, we released something called Baseline on Belonging. We've been partnering with NOMA, the National Organization of Minority Architects. So we did this joint study all about the path to licensure from an education perspective, an experience perspective, an examination perspective. The experience module was released a few weeks ago. We're actually getting ready to release the examination module. And there are some very interesting findings in there about what are the impediments to getting through AXP versus what are the impediments around the ARE, because it's those individual impediments that start creating those off-ramps for people that then don't get back into the profession. And so that's one of the things we've been doing. Other things we've been doing from an NCARB perspective, from a diversity perspective and inclusion perspective, we for years, when it comes to exam development, have been on the forefront of this. So if you could come to a meeting where the exam is built, because everybody always wants to know, like, who writes all these questions, right? That's a fair question. Who writes all these exam questions? Well, it's actually a bunch of architects, right? It's a bunch of architects from all across the country. And we like strategically assemble committees that really do represent that diversity across the country, because that's how you get the best questions. So you're not, we never put, no offense, a bunch of people from California in the same room. That's not a good idea. If you're writing exam questions, you need somebody from California, you need somebody from New York, you need somebody from the Midwest. Always great to have somebody from the Southeast, and that, right? So we assemble groups based on all these different factors, including, you know, race and ethnicity, firm size, years of experience, because we're looking for that holistic approach to consensus item writing. And that is the way it works. So like I, as an individual, don't write items for the exam. It's volunteers that write items, but in all honesty, by the time they're live, they've been touched by that entire subcommittee that's working on it. So we do diversity issues there. And as an organization, NCARB has also been looking at just diversity in NCARB, right? And NCARB, when I say that, means the member boards also. So like all the way down to your jurisdictional licensing board, that path to get on the licensing board is very important, because we need diversity at all levels. So not just inside NCARB, not just inside NCARB committees, but also on the licensing boards. So that way the people who are, you know, in the room talking about what are the rules and regulations for you as a practitioner in California really understand you as a practitioner in the state of California.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear, Jared, and I appreciate you taking the time to speak to me. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Karina, who's going to be fielding some of the audience questions for the next few minutes. Karina?
Thank you so much. Before I jump into the questions, I did also want to just take a quick second to introduce our AIA California staff, which I didn't do at the beginning. So you are seeing Stephen Tanner from AIA Los Angeles, wonderful resource for membership and all things just related to AIA for that chapter. And we also have Nikki Dennis-Stevens with us, our executive director from AIA California, our fearless leader of all things AIA here in California. So thank you to our staff, to everybody who's been on the panel, and to our audience for these questions. So Tommy Young asked a popular question. I recall having this question myself. Could you talk a little bit more about the eligibility process for signing up to take your initial exams? There's a fair amount of confusion, I think, for initial candidates. Am I looking for permission from NCARB or CAB? He's saying, they're saying, I've heard a lot about needing to log a certain amount of hours prior to being eligible to take the exam, and still confused about how that works. Are we able to sign up for the exam and take the exams at will, or is there a qualifying process?
Sure, I can do the quick overview, Tommy, is that eligibilities in the state of California, so if you want to be a California candidate, are controlled by the California Architects Board. So what you would do is you would go to your NCARB record where you you should have been documenting probably some AXP experience. If you click on the exams tab, you can request eligibilities. And then when you do, we're going to ask you the question, or the system is going to ask you the question, in which jurisdiction? If you pick California, what ends up happening is our system tells the California system that you've requested eligibilities. However, you still need to apply to the state of California. So if you have not done the application to California, California is not going to turn on your eligibilities. And so in California, it's a multi-step process. Other jurisdictions aren't the same as California. So you may hear from some people go, oh, super easy. I just went to NCARB and I clicked get eligibilities and it happened. That's because they're not testing in California. They're testing in other jurisdictions.
Appreciate that so much, Jared. I do think that helps clear up some of the confusion. I remember in my position, like, okay, I need to go to CAP. So I know that often comes up for folks. And again, our licensing advisors can help to clarify, when are we talking to CAP and when are we talking to NCARB. Next question comes from Rachel. Many people living in California do not have adequate space to test from home and meet all of the test from home requirements because this is a state where many emerging professionals live in small apartments or with families and roommates. Signing up for the testing in person is still more difficult than pre-pandemic due to COVID restrictions throughout the state. Is NCARB evaluating the differences in pandemic has taken across each state and potentially looking at updating the rolling clock extension?
So first of all, Rachel, I think it's a great idea about actually thinking about it from a state-by-state perspective, because NCARB hasn't done that. We have not been tracking. We obviously collect data on which states people are living in and where they're testing, but we haven't looked at it from that perspective. That probably be a very good retro to go into and do that. NCARB has been still monitoring, impact of testing and whether there's going to be an additional rolling clock extension. At this time, what I will tell you is the conversations have been no, that's not what's happening, but I wouldn't say never, right? Like if things continue on, I think that's the reality. And so if you personally are having issues also related to testing and things like that, you can still apply for a rolling clock extension and not wait for NCARB to do a universal one, because you may have an individual situation that warrants that, right? So I would say, consider that if you get to a point where you really do need a rolling clock extension.
Thanks again, Jared. Okay, our next question, there's several questions in one, so I'm going to try to take this a little bit apart. I know the first initial aspect asked about with 6 exams, there's a great deal of overlap. I know in my role as a licensing advisor in an unofficial capacity for many years, this question comes up a lot. So I'll just leave it at that one. Is there anything that you can offer just in terms of an explanation about why there's so much overlap?
Yes. So I would say, so there clearly is overlap, and it's because of the structure of AIA 5.0. Now, I will admit, the structure of AIA 5.0 was not an accident. It was very purposeful. So one of the realities, if anybody remembers 4.0, we really refer to 4.0 as buckets of content. Like all of the structures was here. All of the building system stuff was here. 5.0, it's not like that at all, because the decision was made that that's not architecture, right? Like you don't go to work and just talk structures all day or talk building systems all day. And so it's important to understand that, yeah, you're going to have to understand structures across the area, and you're going to have to understand building systems and mechanical systems across the area. What's important to understand to be successful is at what level do you need to understand the content? So there's a big difference between programming and analysis understanding structures versus project development and documentation understanding structures. And so, yeah, I'm not going to tell you, oh, you don't need to know structures for those divisions. You absolutely do, but you need to understand it from a planning and programming perspective, which is high level systems approach in PA. You need to understand it from an integration approach when you get to PDD. And that was actually a very, purposeful decision in how this exam structure was built.
Thank you. That's a very helpful explanation. The next aspect of this question is just the nature of how many exams there are. It takes so long for architects. We have 6 exams, engineers have 2. Just again, to try to offer the group a little bit of an explanation of why.
Yeah, so it comes down to the number of divisions are based on the content area that's being assessed, right? And in architecture, there's a lot, right? Everything from practice to project to the different phases of design all the way through construction and evaluation. And so the decision, the last time we restructured was to go down to 6 divisions. I'm not going to, I could be like, oh, don't worry, it used to be 9, right? No, because it's still a lot. Like I admit, like 6 divisions is a lot. NCARB is looking at what is the future exam. That's actually one of the things we are doing right now is what is the future of the exam? And one of the goals is to continue to make it smaller. Like the exam used to take over 30 some hours to complete. It's now down into the 20s. We as an organization still think that's a lot and want to keep condensing it. What we have to figure out and how we balance this is by making the exam shorter or smaller, that we're still allowing you to demonstrate that you know what you need to know to practice independently. And whether that means a shift into experience or a shift into something else, that's actually some of the push and pull of design that we're working on right now.
There's a follow-up question in the chat, which is, should I wait then to take the test? And I would say, I think all of us who have been taking the test for quite some time know that it's always been changing. It will always be changing. So we don't want to encourage anyone to wait on some ultimate goal of, the version of test that you'd like. We want everybody to get in there and because this is to the earliest question about the value of the license, we don't want that barrier for people. We want them to seek that opportunity.
Absolutely, get in there now. I will say this, like the reality is a restructuring of the ARE. As I said, the last time we did this, when we went from 4.0 to 5.0, NCARB made the decision to transition 5 years before 4.0 was done being delivered. It takes a long time to restructure an exam and build new content. So there's no immediate plans to change the 5.0 6th division structure. It is going to be in place for several years to come. We still have to decide what the new structure would be, and then we have to build it. And so we're years away.
Thank you. And then the last aspect of this question is really about, the question is about young professionals and their earning potential. And so I think, again, to offer the mission of NCARB is really about the delivering the exams, protecting health, safety, and welfare of the public. And then I think here we are with AIA, then there's additional provisions that AIA do to rally around young professionals and try to provide support. So in collaboration, we're constantly looking to, make the profession a better practice for all of us. So I would say that that's my impression of the answer, if anybody else would like to chime in on that. Go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, so Corinna, what I will say on that is also that's actually one of the benefits of getting a license, right? Is license also provides you some independence, maybe in a way that you don't feel you have if you're not licensed, right? You may not feel you can like step out and go in this direction. Licensure is a personal choice, right? It really is a personal choice to commit the time and sacrifice, like to literally say, hey, I'm not going to spend time with my family or my friends. I'm going to study. I'm going to do this. I'm going to spend money to do all of this. But it can provide you some independence to say, yeah, like I'm in a sucky work environment and I'm going to go see what else is out there. And it's a little easier and a little nicer to be able to do that from the perspective of being licensed than not.
Excellent final point. I think we'll stop there with the Q&A. We will address the additional questions, and I want to turn it over to David for some closing comments.
There was a comment that was made, though. What's going to happen with any questions that weren't answered? Can candidates email them to us?
The questions that have been received in the Q&A, so if people still have questions, you can still type them in, and we will provide a response to the attendees of any unanswered questions.
Great. Well, yes, we are running out of time, so I'm going to try to make this short and sweet. But first of all, thank you, Jared. This was really good. I think we went through a lot. Unfortunately, it was only an hour. I wasn't sure if this was going to go before or over, but I think there are some next steps that we can definitely take. And one of the things that we want to do is increase that communication and collaboration with NCARB. At the same time, I do want to invite everybody to go to the governing sites, those organizations that are important, because a lot of times we get our information from either supplemental or third-party websites. And although they are great and help support and give us hacks for whether it's testing or information, I think that foundation of education comes from whether it's NCARB, NOMA, AIA, NAB. So there's a lot of organizations. So I encourage everybody to go through the websites. There's a lot of resources out there. And one of the reasons I joined AIA was for that change. I was able to serve in a national position. It just opened up my eyes with how many resources there are out there for us. So I encourage everyone to use your local chapters, local AIA chapters as a resource. Talk to your EP directors. Liam, he is the licensing advisor for Northern California. I'm for Southern California, so please reach out to us. And of course, the other one is get involved. I think once you sort of step behind that curtain, you see everything that's happening. It's not necessarily, we don't just sit back and try to figure out ways to control, but I think it's more of how we can educate, because there is a lot out there. So with that, Jared, thank you so much. Francisco, appreciate you, and Elise and Liam, and Karina, thank you.
Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
This was great. Thank you, guys.